Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Tonight, I'm reading some absolutely unhinged, entitled family stories that will make you question whether or not these are even real or not, because, let's be honest, the internet is filled with absurd stories these days. But before we start, I just wanted to thank you guys for the amazing support, as well as the channel members for supporting me even further. You guys are amazing. Anyway, grab your favourite drink, get comfortable, and let's explore some stories that will probably make your jaw drop. Our first story comes from someone who learned that some parents will literally rewrite history to make themselves look good. My mother-in-law tried to take credit for my pregnancy announcement at Thanksgiving dinner. I'm 26 and my husband Jake is 28. We've been married for 2 years and trying to conceive for about 8 months when we finally got that positive test. We were over the moon. We decided to wait until Thanksgiving to tell our families. Since everyone would be gathered together, we thought it would be the perfect moment to share our joy with the people we love most. I should mention that my mother-in-law Patricia has always had this need to be the centre of attention at family gatherings. She's the type who interrupts conversations to tell stories about herself and somehow manages to make every celebration about her past achievements or current struggles. But I figured a pregnancy announcement would be different. This was about her future grandchild. Surely she'd let us have our moment. We planned it carefully. I wore a loose sweater that said, "Thankful for two," and we brought a pumpkin pie with baby booties hidden inside when dessert time came. I stood up with Jake and announced that we had something special to share. Everyone got quiet and I could feel the anticipation in the room. My heart was racing with excitement as I lifted my sweater to reveal the message underneath. The reaction was everything we hoped for. My mum started crying. My dad jumped up to hug us. Jake's siblings were cheering and asking a million questions. It was pure magic for about 30 seconds. Then Patricia stood up, cleared her throat dramatically, and said, "Well, I've been keeping this secret for weeks, but I suppose now I can tell everyone I knew before anyone else because I have that special mother's intuition." The room went silent. Everyone turned to look at her, confused. Jake and I exchanged glances because we definitely hadn't told her anything. She continued, "I noticed the signs weeks ago. The way she was glowing, how she kept declining wine at dinner. I even bought baby clothes last week because I just knew my maternal instincts are never wrong." I was stunned. We had been incredibly careful not to give any hints. We hadn't changed our behaviour at all, and the wine thing wasn't even true. I had been drinking normally until we found out 3 days earlier. But Patricia was spinning this elaborate tale about how she'd figured it out before we even knew ourselves. She was literally stealing our thunder and rewriting the narrative to make herself the hero of our story. My husband looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. His face was red with embarrassment, and I could see him struggling with how to handle his mother without causing a scene. His sister tried to redirect the conversation back to us, but Patricia kept going on about her incredible intuition and how she'd been dropping hints to see if we'd confess. I finally spoke up and said, "Actually, Patricia, we just found out ourselves 3 days ago, and we haven't told anyone or changed our behaviour in any way. We wanted this to be a surprise for everyone." She looked flustered for a moment, then doubled down, claiming that a mother always knows, even before the couple does, and that she'd been praying for this news for months. The rest of the evening was uncomfortable. Everyone could sense the tension, and what should have been a beautiful family celebration turned into an awkward situation where we felt like guests at our own announcement. Patricia continued to insert herself into every conversation about the baby, talking about her plans as a grandmother and how she'd always known this day would come. Later that night, Jake apologised profusely for his mother's behaviour. He said he'd talk to her about boundaries before the baby arrives. But I can't shake the feeling that this is just the beginning. If she's willing to steal credit for our pregnancy announcement, what will she try to claim once the baby is actually here? The most frustrating part is that some family members seem to buy into her story, or at least didn't want to challenge her. They nodded along when she talked about her intuition and even asked her how she knew we were pregnant. It felt like our special moment had been completely hijacked and rebranded as Patricia's psychic abilities. I keep replaying the evening in my head, wondering if I should have been more direct in shutting down her claims, but I also didn't want to cause a huge family fight. On Thanksgiving, Jake says I handled it perfectly and that everyone with half a brain could see what she was doing, but it still hurts that our announcement got overshadowed by her need for attention. Now I'm worried about every milestone going forward. Will she try to take credit for feeling the baby kick first? Will she claim she predicted the gender? Will our child's first words somehow be attributed to her special grandmother, Powers? I love Jake, and I want our child to have a relationship with his family, but I'm not sure how to deal with a mother-in-law who seems incapable of letting anyone else have a moment in the spotlight. Wow, Patricia really said, I have maternal intuition superpowers, and everyone just went along with it. Like, that's a real thing. Imagine being so desperate for attention that you literally steal someone's pregnancy announcement and turn it into your own personal psychic reading show. This woman is going to be a nightmare once that baby arrives and she starts claiming she taught it how to walk. Speaking of parents who can't stay in their lane, let's dive into this next story about a mother who took helicopter parenting to terrifying new heights. My mum got me fired from my dream job because she thought my boss was being mean to me. I'm 24 years old, and after graduating college, I finally landed my dream job at a prestigious marketing firm in downtown Seattle. The position was everything I had worked for, creative, challenging, and with amazing growth potential. I was thrilled to start my career and prove myself in the professional world. My boss, Jennifer, was tough but fair. She had high standards and wasn't afraid to give direct feedback when something needed improvement coming from college, where professors often sugar-coated criticism. It was definitely an adjustment, but I appreciated her honesty and knew it would make me better at my job. She was the type of leader who pushed you to excel, and I respected that about her. About 2 months into the job, I was working on a major campaign for a tech startup. It was my first big solo project, and I was nervous but excited to show what I could do. I had been putting in long hours, researching the target demographic and crafting what I thought was a brilliant strategy. When I presented it to Jennifer, she pointed out several flaws in my approach and told me to start over. I was disappointed but understood her feedback. The strategy I had developed was too generic and didn't really capture what made this startup unique. She was right, and I knew I could do better. I went home that night, determined to create something amazing. I called my mum to vent about my frustration and get some encouragement like I always did when things got tough. I explained how my boss had rejected my first draft and asked me to completely rethink my approach. I told my mum about the specific feedback Jennifer had given me and how I planned to incorporate those suggestions into a stronger campaign. My mum listened and seemed supportive, telling me that everyone faces setbacks and that this was just part of learning the business. What I didn't realise was that my mum had been taking mental notes about everything I told her. About work, she knew my boss's name, where I worked, and apparently had been forming her own opinions about whether Jennifer was treating me fairly. In her mind, any criticism of her precious daughter was automatically unfair and mean-spirited. The next morning I arrived at work excited to present my revised strategy to Jennifer. I had worked until midnight, perfecting every detail, and I was confident this version captured exactly what the client needed. But when I walked into the office, the receptionist gave me a strange look and told me Jennifer wanted to see me immediately. I knocked on Jennifer's door and she invited me in, but her expression was cold and professional in a way I hadn't seen before. She closed the door behind me and asked me to sit down. Then she said, "We need to talk about the phone call I received yesterday from your mother." My stomach dropped. Apparently, while I was working on my revised campaign, my mum had decided to call my office and give Jennifer a piece of her mind. She had introduced herself as my mother and proceeded to lecture my boss about proper management techniques and how to treat young employees with respect. She told Jennifer that making me start over was discouraging and unprofessional. My mum had apparently spent 20 minutes on the phone explaining how hard I had worked on the original campaign and how Jennifer's feedback was crushing my spirit. She suggested that maybe Jennifer needed to learn better communication skills and that experienced managers should know how to motivate rather than tear down their employees. I wanted to disappear into the floor. I couldn't believe my mother had called my workplace and confronted my boss about giving me professional feedback. It was mortifying, and I knew immediately that this was a career-ending mistake. Jennifer told me that while she understood my mum meant well, having family members call to argue about work decisions was completely inappropriate. She explained that in a professional environment, employees need to be able to handle feedback and criticism independently, and that my mother's call raised serious questions about my maturity and readiness for the corporate world. She said she couldn't have team members whose parents might call to complain whenever they received constructive criticism. Jennifer was professional but firm. She told me that this incident made her question whether I was ready for the responsibilities of the position, and that the company couldn't risk having family members interfere with business operations. She gave me the option to resign or be terminated for unprofessional conduct. I chose to resign because I didn't want a termination on my record, but I was devastated. This was my dream job, and I had been working so hard to prove myself now. It was over because my mum had decided to fight my battles for me. Like I was still in elementary school, I packed up my desk in shame, while my co-workers whispered and stared. When I got home, I confronted my mum about what she had done. She seemed genuinely surprised that I was upset. She said she was just trying to help, and that she couldn't stand to see her daughter being treated poorly by a mean boss. She insisted that Jennifer was out of line, and that any good manager would have appreciated her feedback. I tried to explain that what she did was career suicide, and that I would now have to explain this situation in future job interviews. My mum got defensive and said that if Jennifer couldn't handle a concerned parent, then maybe it wasn't the right place for me anyway. She seemed to think she'd done me a favour by exposing my boss's true character. It took me 4 months to find another job, and even then I had to take a significant pay cut and start at a much smaller company. The whole experience taught me that I needed to set serious boundaries with my mum about my professional life, but it also cost me the career opportunity I had worked so hard to achieve. The worst part is that my mum still doesn't understand what she did wrong. She occasionally asks if I've heard from Jennifer and suggests that maybe I should go back and ask for my job back, because surely they've realised their mistake by now. She lives in this alternate reality where she was the hero protecting her daughter from workplace bullying. That's not helicopter parenting, that's kamikaze parenting. Your mum literally called your boss to complain about you getting normal workplace feedback, and then acted shocked when it backfired spectacularly. Imagine explaining that in job interviews. Oh, why did you leave your last position? Well, my mummy called to tell my boss she was being mean to me. Some parents really think the world revolves around protecting their adult children from basic life experiences. Our next story shows what happens when entitled parents decide that other people's property is basically a free rental service. My neighbour demanded I give her my car because she has kids, and I don't. I'm 23 years old, and I live in a small apartment complex in Phoenix. I work remotely as a graphic designer, which means I don't drive to an office every day, but I do need my car for groceries, appointments, and visiting family. About 6 months ago, a new family moved into the unit next to mine, a single mom named Linda, with 3 kids aged 5, 8 and 10. Linda seemed nice enough at first. We'd wave in the hallway and make small talk about the weather or the building's broken elevator. Her kids were loud, but not unusually so. For apartment living, I figured we'd be the kind of neighbours who keep to ourselves, but stay cordial when we cross paths. About a month after she moved in, Linda knocked on my door. One evening, she explained that her car had broken down, and she needed to get her youngest to a doctor's appointment. The next morning, she asked if she could borrow my car for a few hours. I was hesitant because I barely knew her, but she seemed desperate, and it was just for a medical emergency, so I agreed. She returned the car with a full tank of gas and was incredibly grateful. She thanked me multiple times and said she'd never forget my kindness. I felt good about helping a neighbour in need and figured that would be the end of it. But apparently, Linda took my one-time favour as an invitation to treat my car like her personal vehicle. 2 weeks later, she knocked again. This time she needed to take her middle child to soccer practice, and her car was in the shop again. I reluctantly agreed because I didn't have any plans that evening, but I mentioned that I couldn't make this a regular thing. She nodded and promised it would just be this once, but the requests kept coming. Every few weeks, Linda would appear at my door with a new transportation emergency. Her car was getting repaired. Her sister couldn't give her a ride. She had to pick up groceries for all 3 kids each time. She'd emphasize how much harder everything was for her as a single mother, and how lucky I was to not have those responsibilities. I started to feel manipulated, but I also felt guilty saying no to someone who clearly struggled financially. I could see her kids through the window sometimes, and they seemed like good kids who deserved to get to their activities and appointments. So I kept saying yes, even though it was becoming increasingly inconvenient. The turning point came when Linda started assuming she could use my car. Without asking, she'd text me things like, "Need the car for 2 hours tomorrow afternoon," or "Can you leave the keys under my mat?" I have an early appointment. I realised she had completely crossed the line from asking favours to expecting access to my property. I decided to have a conversation with her about boundaries. I knocked on her door one Saturday morning and explained that while I wanted to help when there were true emergencies, I needed my car to be available for my own needs. I suggested she look into public transportation or rideshare services for regular activities. Linda's reaction was not what I expected. Instead of understanding, she became defensive and angry. She said that I was being selfish and that people without children couldn't possibly understand the challenges of single parenthood. She accused me of having a car that just sits in the parking lot most days, while her family suffered without reliable transportation. I tried to stay calm and reiterated that my car was my property and my responsibility. I explained that I had been more than generous with lending it out, but that I needed to prioritise my own needs. She rolled her eyes and said that people like me were the reason society was falling apart because we only cared about ourselves. The conversation ended awkwardly, but I thought I had made my position clear. I stopped responding to her texts about borrowing the car and avoided making eye contact when we passed in the hallway. I hoped she would get the message and find alternative transportation solutions, but Linda wasn't done. A few weeks later, I came home from grocery shopping to find her waiting by my car in the parking lot. She approached me as I was unloading bags and said we needed to talk. She explained that she had been thinking about our situation and had come up with what she called a fair solution. Linda proposed that since I didn't really need my car every day and she had 3 children who needed to get to school activities and appointments, we should work out a shared custody arrangement. She suggested that she could have access to the car Monday through Friday during school hours, and I could have it evenings and weekends. I stared at her in disbelief. This woman was seriously suggesting that I should give her regular access to my car because she had decided her needs were more important than mine. I told her that wasn't going to happen and that she needed to find her own transportation solutions. Linda's expression changed from hopeful to furious. She started yelling about how selfish and heartless I was. She said that anyone with basic human decency would help a struggling mother, and that my refusal to share proved I was a terrible person. She accused me of letting innocent children suffer because I was too greedy to share my resources. She went on a rant about how people without kids didn't deserve the same privileges as parents because they didn't have real responsibilities. She said the world would be a better place if selfish people like me were forced to help families in need, instead of hoarding resources we didn't even use. I was so shocked by her entitlement that I could barely respond. I managed to say that my car was not community property, and that her transportation problems were not my responsibility. Then I walked away while she continued yelling about my selfishness loud enough for the whole complex to hear. The next morning I found a note under my door. It was 3 pages long and detailed all the reasons why Linda deserved access to my car. More than I did, she had calculated how many miles I drove per week versus how many miles she needed and determined that her usage would be more efficient. She even included a proposed schedule for sharing the note. Also contained guilt trips about her children. Missing opportunities because their mother couldn't drive them places. She wrote about how my refusal was directly harming 3 innocent kids and that I would have to live with that on my conscience. She ended by saying she was willing to pay me $20 a month for the privilege of using my car during the week. I showed the note to my boyfriend, who couldn't believe someone would actually write something so entitled. He suggested I report it to the apartment management, since Linda was clearly harassing me about my personal property. I decided to keep the note as evidence in case things escalated further. They did escalate. Linda began parking her broken-down car behind mine, so I couldn't leave without asking her to move it. She claimed it was the only available spot, but there were clearly other spaces in the lot when I confronted her about it. She acted innocent and said she had every right to park there. She also started making passive-aggressive comments whenever she saw me in the hallway. Things like, "Must be nice to have a working car sitting unused," or "Some people don't know how good they have it." Her kids seemed embarrassed by her behaviour and would avoid eye contact when she made these remarks. Finally, I had enough. I went to the apartment office and filed a complaint about harassment. The property manager was sympathetic and said they'd received similar complaints about Linda from other residents. Apparently, she had also asked several neighbours to babysit her kids for free and had gotten angry when they refused. The manager spoke with Linda about appropriate neighbour relationships and warned her that continued harassment could result in eviction. I don't know exactly what was said, but Linda stopped bothering me about my car after that conversation. She also moved her car to a different parking spot. We still see each other occasionally in the hallway, but we don't speak. Linda gives me dirty looks and sometimes makes comments under her breath, but I ignore her completely. Her kids seem like they're doing fine, despite not having regular access to my vehicle, which proves that she was perfectly capable of finding other solutions. Looking back, I realise I should have set boundaries much earlier, instead of enabling her sense of entitlement by repeatedly saying yes to her requests. But I learned an important lesson about how some people will take advantage of kindness and turn it into an expectation of ongoing service. Linda really said your car is basically communal property because I have children, and you don't, as if having kids gives you eminent domain over other people's vehicles. The entitlement is staggering. She literally tried to negotiate a custody agreement for someone else's car and then got mad when reality didn't bend to her demands. Let's move to a story that shows how some parents think their child's desires automatically override everyone else's property rights. My sister-in-law tried to force me to sell my house to her for half price because her daughter loved it. I'm 29 and my husband Alex is 31. We've been married for 3 years and we recently bought our first home together. It's a beautiful colonial-style house with 4 bedrooms, a big backyard, and it's in an excellent school district. We saved for years to afford the down payment and we're incredibly proud of our new place. Alex has a younger sister, Jessica, who's 35 and married with 2 kids, a 7-year-old daughter named Chloe and a 4-year-old son. The family dynamic has always been complicated because Jessica was the golden child growing up, and she still expects everyone to cater to her wishes, even as an adult. When we invited the extended family over for a housewarming party, everyone was complimentary about our new place. We gave tours, showed off the renovations we'd done, and talked about our plans for the backyard. Jessica seemed happy for us, and her kids had fun running around, exploring all the rooms. Chloe was particularly enchanted with the house. She kept asking questions about every room and talked about how much she loved the reading nook we'd created in one of the bedrooms. She was sweet about it, and we enjoyed seeing the house through a child's eyes. It felt good to know that our hard work had created a space that felt magical to someone so young. About a week after the party, Jessica called and asked if she could bring Chloe over to see the house again. She said her daughter hadn't stopped talking about it and wanted to show her some ideas she had for decorating. I thought it was cute and invited them over for the weekend. During that visit, Chloe was even more excited about the house than before. She had apparently been drawing pictures of her favourite rooms and had ideas about where she'd put her toys if she lived there. Jessica encouraged this behaviour and kept asking me detailed questions about our mortgage payments, property taxes, and what we thought the house was worth. I found the financial questions odd, but assumed Jessica was just curious about home ownership, since she and her husband had been renting for years. I answered politely, but started to feel uncomfortable when she began taking notes about everything I told her. A few days later, Jessica called and asked if we could meet for coffee. She said she had something important to discuss. I assumed she wanted advice about house hunting, since she'd been asking so many questions about home ownership. But what she proposed was completely insane. Jessica explained that Chloe had been crying every night since visiting our house, because she wanted to live there so badly. She said her daughter had never connected with a place like this before, and that it was clearly meant to be their family home. She spoke as if the house had chosen Chloe rather than us having bought it. Then came the proposal. Jessica suggested that since Chloe loved the house so much, and since we didn't have children yet, we should consider selling it to her family. She acknowledged that they couldn't afford the full market value, but offered to buy it for exactly half of what we paid, essentially asking us to take a massive financial loss, so her daughter could have her dream house. I was speechless. The audacity of asking us to sell our home at a huge loss just because her child liked it was beyond anything I could have imagined. Jessica seemed to interpret my silence as consideration rather than shock, and continued explaining why this arrangement would benefit everyone. She argued that we were young and could easily find another house, whereas Chloe was at a crucial age where stability and the right environment were essential. She claimed that children's needs should always come first and that we'd understand once we had kids of our own. She made it sound like keeping our own house was somehow selfish. Jessica also mentioned that the house was too big for just the two of us and that a family with children would make better use of the space. She said it seemed wasteful for us to have 4 bedrooms when we only needed one, and that Chloe could really flourish in such a beautiful environment. I finally found my voice and told Jessica that we weren't interested in selling our house at any price, let alone for half its value. I explained that this was our dream home too, and that we had worked incredibly hard to afford it. Her reaction was immediate and explosive. She accused me of being heartless and selfish. She said that anyone who truly loved children would want to see them happy, and that my refusal was devastating to Chloe. She claimed that I was putting money above a child's emotional well-being, and that this would traumatize her daughter Jessica, then tried a different approach. She suggested that maybe we could work out a rent-to-own arrangement where they would live in the house and gradually buy it from us over time. She proposed that they pay us what they currently paid in rent, which was about 1/3 of our mortgage payment. When I again said no, Jessica became increasingly desperate. She offered to let us live in their rental apartment, which was a tiny 2-bedroom place in a much less desirable neighbourhood. She seemed to genuinely believe this was a fair trade and couldn't understand why I wasn't jumping at the opportunity. The conversation ended with Jessica storming out of the coffee shop, but not before telling everyone within earshot that I was refusing to help a child in need. She made it sound like I was denying medicine to a sick kid rather than declining to sell my house at a massive loss. Over the next few weeks, Jessica launched a full-scale campaign to pressure us into selling. She called other family members to explain the situation from her perspective, making it sound like we were being unreasonably stubborn about helping Chloe. She conveniently left out the part about expecting us to lose $50,000 in the process. Alex's parents called to ask if we'd consider Jessica's offer. They had been told that it was just a matter of price negotiation, not that she wanted us to essentially give away half the value of our home. When Alex explained the real numbers, his parents were shocked and immediately stopped pressuring us. Jessica also tried to use Chloe as emotional leverage. She would bring her daughter to family gatherings and have her talk about how sad she was that she couldn't live in the pretty house. Chloe would ask me directly why I wouldn't let her family live there, and it was clear she'd been coached on what to say. The whole situation reached a breaking point at Alex's birthday dinner. Jessica stood up during dessert and made a speech about family priorities. She talked about how some people put material possessions above the happiness of children, and how disappointing it was to see such selfishness within the family. Everyone at the table knew she was talking about me, and the room became incredibly uncomfortable. Alex finally stood up and told his sister that her behaviour was inappropriate and that she needed to stop harassing us about our house. He made it clear that we would never sell and that she needed to find another solution for her housing situation. Jessica broke down crying and accused Alex of choosing me over his own niece. She said that his loyalty should be to his family first and that I had obviously poisoned him against his sister. Several other family members tried to calm the situation, but Jessica was inconsolable. She eventually left the restaurant with her family, but not before announcing that she would never forgive us for crushing her daughter's dreams. She said that every time Chloe asked about the house, she would have to explain that her aunt and uncle cared more about money than her happiness. In the weeks that followed, Jessica continued to post passive-aggressive messages on social media about people who have more than they need, while children suffer. She never mentioned us by name, but the context was obvious to anyone who knew about the house situation. Eventually, Jessica and her husband did find a house to buy in a different school district. It's smaller than ours and not as updated, but it's a perfectly nice home for their family. Chloe seems happy there and has stopped asking about our house, though Jessica still makes occasional comments about how things could have been different. The whole experience taught me that some people feel entitled to other people's property just because they want it more. Jessica genuinely believed that her daughter's desire for our house was more important than our right to own it. She couldn't comprehend why we wouldn't sacrifice our financial security for her child's preference. Wow, Jessica literally tried to negotiate buying someone else's house for half price because her kid liked it, and then got mad when basic economics didn't work that way. Imagine thinking that your child's temporary infatuation with a house means the owners should take a $50,000 loss so your family can have it. The delusion is breathtaking. She really thought emotional manipulation would convince people to give away their life savings. If you're still here listening to these wild stories, consider subscribing, because there's always more unhinged family drama where this came from. And honestly, we could all use a reminder that our own relatives might be difficult, but at least they're not trying to steal our cars or houses. Let's dive into our next story about a parent who thought public property was basically their personal playground. My neighbour called the police on me for using the public park because her son was having a birthday party there. I'm 31 and I live in a quiet suburban neighbourhood with my wife and our 2 dogs. We don't have kids yet, but we love taking our golden retrievers to the local park for their evening walks and weekend fetch sessions. It's a beautiful public park with open fields, walking trails, and a playground area that's always busy with families. The park has been part of our daily routine for 3 years. We usually go around 6 in the evening when it's less crowded and our dogs can run freely in the open grass areas. We're always responsible. Pet owners, we clean up after our dogs, keep them on leash when required, and make sure they don't bother other park users. Last Saturday, we arrived at our usual time and noticed that someone had set up an elaborate birthday party in the main field area. There were tables, chairs, a bouncy house, and decorations everywhere. It looked like they were expecting a lot of guests and had clearly put significant effort into the setup. I didn't think much of it. People use the park for parties all the time, and there's plenty of space for everyone. The field they were using was maybe a quarter of the total open area, so we headed to the far end where we always play fetch with our dogs. We were easily 100 yards away from their party setup. We'd been there for maybe 10 minutes throwing tennis balls for our dogs when a woman marched over to us. She was probably in her late 30s, wearing a floral dress and had that particular expression that meant trouble. She introduced herself as Monica and said she needed to talk to us about the situation. Monica explained that she was hosting her son's 7th birthday party and that our dogs were going to ruin everything. She said that children were afraid of dogs and that having pets in the same area would make her guests uncomfortable. She asked if we could come back tomorrow instead. I politely explained that this was a public park and that we had as much right to be there as anyone else. I pointed out that we were nowhere near their party area and that our dogs were well behaved and under control. Monica's face turned red, and she said that wasn't the point. She insisted that when someone was hosting a special event, like a birthday party, other park users should be considerate enough to find somewhere else to go. She said that any reasonable person would understand that a child's birthday only happens once a year, and that our dog walking could happen any time. I told her that while I understood she wanted her son's party to be perfect, we weren't doing anything wrong or disruptive. Our dogs were playing in a completely different section of the park, and we weren't bothering anyone. Monica seemed to think that our mere presence was somehow threatening to ruin her entire event. She then demanded to know if we had gotten permission to bring dogs to the park. I explained that dogs were allowed in designated areas and that we always followed the posted rules. Monica said that didn't matter because she had reserved the entire park for her son's party. When I asked to see her reservation paperwork, Monica became flustered and said that she didn't need paperwork because she'd been planning this party for months. She claimed that anyone with common sense would know that a birthday party took priority over casual park activities. The conversation was getting more heated, so I suggested we just agree to stay in our separate areas of the park. Monica said that wasn't good enough because the sight of our dogs would still upset the children. Even from a distance, she demanded that we leave immediately and threatened to call security. I pointed out that there was no security at this public park and that we weren't breaking any rules or ordinances. Monica stormed back to her party setup, and I assumed that would be the end of it. We continued playing with our dogs and minded our own business. About 20 minutes later, we heard sirens and saw a police car pulling into the park parking lot. I couldn't believe someone had actually called the cops over a neighbour dispute about public park usage. But sure enough, 2 officers walked over to speak with Monica first. After a few minutes, one of the officers approached us. He looked slightly embarrassed and asked if we were the people with the dogs. I confirmed that we were and explained our side of the situation. The officer nodded and said he had to ask us a few routine questions. He asked if our dogs were current on their vaccinations, if they were licensed, and if we had any documentation with us. I showed him our dog licenses and vaccination records that I always carry in my wallet. The officer seemed satisfied and said everything appeared to be in order. Then he explained that Monica had called 911 to report that we were harassing her family and threatening to let our dogs attack the children at the birthday party. She had apparently told the dispatcher that we were refusing to leave despite being asked multiple times and that she felt unsafe. The officer asked if we had threatened anyone or made any aggressive statements. I assured him that we had not, and that we'd simply been playing fetch with our dogs in a different area of the park. He walked back to speak with Monica again, and I could see her gesturing wildly and pointing in our direction. When the officer returned, he looked even more uncomfortable. He said that Monica was insisting we had been intimidating and that our dogs had been acting aggressively toward her party guests. He asked if our dogs had approached any children or shown any signs of aggression. I explained that our dogs hadn't been anywhere near the children and had been focused entirely on playing fetch with us. The officer asked if we would mind moving to a different section of the park just to keep the peace. I said we'd be happy to accommodate that request as we were gathering our things to move. Monica called out that we shouldn't be allowed in the park at all if we couldn't respect other families. She told the officer that people like us were the reason families didn't feel safe in public spaces anymore. The second officer, who had been observing the whole situation, finally spoke up. He told Monica that this was a public park and that everyone had equal rights to use it. He explained that unless someone was breaking posted rules or city ordinances, the police couldn't force them to leave. Monica became increasingly agitated and demanded to speak to the officer's supervisor. She said that her tax dollars paid for the park and that she should have priority access. When hosting important family events, the officer patiently explained that tax dollars from all residents supported the park system. She then tried a different approach, claiming that our dogs had damaged the grass and left waste in the play area. This was completely false, since we always cleaned up after our pets and hadn't been near the playground. The officer asked if she had seen us fail to clean up after our dogs. When Monica couldn't provide any specifics, the officer told her that the complaint appeared to be unfounded. He advised both parties to share the park respectfully and said that calling 911 should be reserved for actual emergencies, not neighbour disputes. As the officers were leaving, Monica shouted that this wasn't over and that she would be filing complaints with the city council about dangerous dog owners terrorising families. She said she was going to make sure new rules were put in place to prevent this situation from happening. Again, we ended up moving to a different area of the park anyway, because the whole confrontation had made the atmosphere uncomfortable. But I was amazed that someone would call the police over such a ridiculous non-issue. Our dogs hadn't bothered anyone, and we were following all posted rules. About an hour later, as we were leaving the park, several parents from the birthday party approached us. They apologised for Monica's behaviour and said they were embarrassed by how she had handled the situation. One dad said his kids had actually wanted to pet our dogs, but Monica wouldn't let them come over. They explained that Monica had been stressed about the party all week and had been worried that everything wouldn't go perfectly. Apparently, she'd been planning this celebration for months and had built it up so much in her mind that any deviation from her vision felt like a disaster. One mom mentioned that Monica had also complained to them about the park's maintenance schedule because the grass wasn't quite as green as she'd hoped for the photos. She said Monica seemed to think that booking a public space meant she could control every aspect of the environment. The parents were genuinely nice people who understood that public spaces are meant to be shared. They said their children had a wonderful time at the party despite Monica's stress, and that our dogs hadn't caused any problems whatsoever. I learned later from a neighbour that Monica had indeed filed complaints with several city departments about dog policies. In parks, she had written lengthy emails about the need for designated dog-free zones and had requested that the city require advance notice before pet owners could use park facilities. None of her complaints went anywhere since our behaviour had been completely appropriate and legal, but it showed just how far she was willing to go to avoid sharing public space with other community members who weren't part of her specific vision. The whole experience reminded me that some people genuinely believe their personal events give them temporary ownership over public property. Monica couldn't accept that other people had equal rights to enjoy the park. Even during her son's birthday celebration, Monica really called the police because she saw dogs existing in the same public park as her party, like she'd purchased exclusive rights to several acres of municipal property. Imagine explaining to a 911 dispatcher that your emergency was seeing well-behaved pets playing fetch 100 yards away from your bouncer house. Some people think having a special occasion means the world should revolve around their event planning. Our next story involves a mother who decided that her parenting philosophy should override basic safety regulations. My mother-in-law brought my severely allergic daughter peanut butter cookies because she doesn't believe in food allergies. I'm 28 and my husband David is 30. We have a 4-year-old daughter named Lily who was diagnosed with a severe peanut allergy when she was 18 months old. We discovered it the hard way when she had a reaction to a peanut butter sandwich at daycare and had to be rushed to the emergency room in an ambulance. Since then, we've been incredibly careful about managing Lily's allergy. We carry EpiPens everywhere we go. We read every ingredient label. We communicate with teachers and caregivers about her condition, and we've educated our family and friends about the seriousness of her allergy. Lily's reaction isn't mild, She doesn't just get a rash or an upset stomach. Exposure to peanuts causes her throat to swell, her breathing to become laboured, and her blood pressure to drop dangerously. This is anaphylaxis, and it can be fatal without immediate treatment. We've had to use her EpiPen twice in the past 2 years. My mother-in-law Carmen has always been sceptical about Lily's allergy. She comes from a generation that didn't really deal with food allergies, and she seems to think they're a modern invention or an excuse for picky eating. She's made comments about how kids in her day ate everything and turned out fine. Despite our repeated explanations about the severity of Lily's condition, Carmen continues to minimize it. She suggested that we're being overprotective and that exposure therapy might help Lily outgrow her allergy faster. She's even implied that we're limiting Lily's childhood experiences unnecessarily. We've had several conversations with Carmen about being careful with food around Lily. We've explained that even trace amounts of peanuts can trigger a reaction and that cross-contamination is a real concern. We've asked her to check ingredient labels and to let us know what she's planning to serve when Lily visits. Carmen always agrees to be careful, but then makes comments about how complicated everything has become and how she managed to raise 3 children without worrying about every little ingredient. She seems to view our precautions as excessive anxiety rather than necessary medical management. Last weekend, Carmen offered to babysit Lily, while David and I went to a wedding. We were hesitant because of past issues, but Carmen had been on her best behaviour lately, and we really needed the help. We went over all of Lily's safety protocols, gave Carmen our emergency contacts, and left detailed instructions. We also left safe snacks that Lily could eat, and reminded Carmen not to give her anything we hadn't approved. Carmen nodded along and assured us that she understood the importance of keeping Lily safe. We felt confident that she would follow our guidelines. The wedding was beautiful, and we were having a great time until David's phone rang around 8 in the evening. It was Carmen, and she sounded panicked. She said that Lily was having trouble breathing and that she didn't know what to do. We immediately told her to call 911 and said we were on our way. We broke every speed limit getting to the hospital, where we found Lily in the emergency room, with an oxygen mask over her face. She was conscious, but clearly struggling to breathe. The medical team was monitoring her vital signs and had already administered epinephrine. Carmen was in the waiting room crying and saying she didn't understand what had happened. The doctor pulled us aside and explained that Lily had experienced severe anaphylaxis and that she was lucky Carmen had called for help. When she did, a few more minutes could have been catastrophic. When we asked Carmen what had happened, she became defensive and evasive. She kept saying that she'd only given Lily approved foods and that she couldn't understand why this had occurred. It wasn't until we pressed her repeatedly that the truth finally came out. Carmen admitted that she had made peanut butter cookies for Lily because she wanted to test whether the allergy was real. She said she'd only given Lily a small bite and had been watching carefully to see what would happen. She genuinely believed that exposure in a controlled environment would prove that we were overreacting. I was so angry I couldn't speak. David was furious and asked his mother how she could risk their daughter's life. To prove a point, Carmen started crying and saying that she never thought anything serious would happen. She claimed she was trying to help by showing us that Lily didn't really have an allergy. The medical team had to explain to Carmen that what she had done was essentially poisoning a child with a known severe allergy. They told her that anaphylaxis can be fatal and that her experiment could have killed Lily. Carmen seemed genuinely shocked that her actions had been so dangerous. Lily had to stay in the hospital overnight for observation, which was terrifying for all of us. She didn't understand why she couldn't breathe properly and kept asking if she was going to be okay. Seeing our 4-year-old hooked up to monitors because of her grandmother's reckless experiment was heartbreaking. When we got home the next day, I told David that Carmen was no longer allowed to be alone with Lily. Ever again, I couldn't trust someone who would deliberately expose our child to a life-threatening allergen to prove their point about modern parenting being too cautious. Carmen called repeatedly over the next few days, trying to apologize and explain that she'd made a mistake. She kept saying that she loves Lily and would never intentionally hurt her, but the damage was done. She had shown that her need to be right was more important than our daughter's safety. She also tried to shift blame by saying that if the allergy was really that severe, we should have been more explicit about the consequences. This was particularly infuriating since we'd had countless conversations about the seriousness of Lily's condition, including showing her photos of previous reactions. David supported my decision to cut off Carmen's unsupervised access to Lily, but it caused a huge rift in his family. His father called us unreasonable and said that Carmen had learned her lesson. His siblings were divided, with some understanding our position and others thinking we were being too harsh. The family drama escalated when Carmen started telling relatives her version of events, where she was a concerned grandmother who made an innocent mistake, and we were vindictive parents who were keeping her from her granddaughter. She left out the part about deliberately feeding peanuts to a severely allergic child. Several family members reached out to mediate and suggest compromise solutions, like supervised visits or family counselling. But I remained firm that Carmen couldn't be trusted. Alone with Lily, the hospital bill alone was over $3,000, not to mention the trauma Lily experienced. Months later, Carmen still doesn't fully grasp the severity of what she did. She's apologised for the outcome, but never acknowledged that deliberately exposing Lily to peanuts was attempted harm. She still frames it as a well-intentioned mistake, rather than a dangerous violation of trust. We've started seeing a family therapist who specialises in medical trauma to help Lily process what happened. She's developed anxiety around eating and sometimes asks if her food is safe, even when we've prepared it ourselves. The psychological impact of her grandmother's experiment will likely last years. Carmen continues to ask when she can see Lily again and suggests that we're punishing her too harshly for one mistake. But keeping our daughter alive isn't punishment. It's our primary responsibility as parents, and we can't risk another experiment in Carmen's ongoing denial about food allergies. Carmen literally fed peanut butter cookies to a child with severe anaphylaxis to prove that modern allergies are fake, and then acted surprised when the kid ended up in the hospital. Fighting for her life, she turned her granddaughter into a lab rat to win an argument about whether food allergies are real. The fact that she still frames this as an innocent mistake rather than child endangerment shows she learned absolutely nothing. Now let's read about a parent who thought her son's social media fame meant everyone else should treat him like royalty. My sister expects me to pay for her son's entire birthday party because he has followers on TikTok. I'm 25 and work as a nurse at a busy metropolitan hospital. It's demanding work, but I love what I do, and I've been able to save up some money for a down payment on my first apartment. My older sister, Rebecca, is 32 and has a 14-year-old son named Tyler, who she's convinced is going to be the next big social media star. Tyler started making TikTok videos about 2 years ago, and he's actually pretty good at it. He does comedy skits, dance videos, and reaction content that genuinely makes people laugh. He currently has around 80,000 followers, which is impressive for a teenager, but Rebecca acts like he's already a Hollywood celebrity. The problem is that Rebecca has completely reorganized her life around Tyler's social media career. She quit her job to be his full-time manager, even though he's not making significant money yet. She spends their entire budget on filming equipment, designer clothes, for his videos and promotional activities. Rebecca constantly talks about Tyler's follower count and engagement rates, like their stock prices. She screenshots comments from fans and shares them in our family group chat. She's created business cards for Tyler and has started charging appearance fees for him to attend local events. About a month ago, Rebecca called to tell me that Tyler's 15th birthday was coming up and that she was planning something special. She explained that this birthday was crucial for his brand development and that they needed to throw a party that would generate viral content. She'd already started planning an elaborate celebration with a professional photographer, videographer, custom decorations, catered food, and party favours, for all the guests. She estimated that the total cost would be around $8,000, which seemed absolutely insane for a teenager's birthday party. When I asked how she planned to pay for such an expensive event, Rebecca explained that this was where I came in. She said that as Tyler's aunt and biggest supporter, I should want to invest in his future success. She framed the party expenses as a business investment rather than a personal celebration. Rebecca argued that Tyler's social media presence was bringing positive attention to our entire family and that supporting his career would benefit everyone. She said that successful influencers often had family members who helped fund their early content creation and that this party could be Tyler's breakthrough moment. She also mentioned that Tyler had been stressed about maintaining his online presence while dealing with typical teenage problems, and that this party would give him amazing content while also letting him enjoy being a kid. She made it sound like I'd be cruel to deny him this opportunity. I was shocked by her expectation that I should fund Tyler's birthday party, especially at such an outrageous price point. I told Rebecca that $8,000 was more than most people spend on weddings, and that it seemed excessive for any child's birthday, regardless of their social media status. Rebecca became defensive and said that I didn't understand the influencer industry or how important it was to maintain a consistent brand image. She explained that Tyler's followers expected high-quality content and that a basic birthday party wouldn't generate the engagement they needed. She also guilt-tripped me by saying that Tyler had specifically mentioned wanting his aunt to help make his birthday special. She claimed that he'd been talking about how excited he was that I might be involved in planning his celebration, and that disappointing him would damage our relationship when I suggested that maybe the party budget should be more reasonable. Rebecca said that thinking small was exactly why most people never achieved success. She told me that Tyler had real potential to become a major influencer, and that missing opportunities like this could set his career back significantly. I tried to explain that I had my own financial goals, and that spending $8,000 on a party wasn't in my budget. Rebecca seemed genuinely surprised that I would prioritize my apartment fund over Tyler's birthday celebration. She asked what was more important than supporting family. She then offered to let me pay in installments or to cover just specific aspects of the party. Like the photographer or the catering, she said that even a partial contribution would show Tyler that his family believed in his dreams and was willing to invest in his success. When I continued to decline, Rebecca's tone shifted from persuasive to accusatory. She said that I was being selfish and short-sighted, and that I'd regret not supporting Tyler. When he became famous, she accused me of being jealous of a teenager's success and of trying to hold him back. She also brought up times when our parents had helped me financially during college and suggested that I owed the family some reciprocal support. She said that Tyler's influencer career was equivalent to my nursing degree and deserved the same investment from family members. The conversation ended badly, with Rebecca hanging up on me after saying that she'd remember who supported Tyler during his rise to fame and who didn't. She made it clear that she expected me to change my mind and that Tyler would be disappointed to learn about my lack of support. Over the next few weeks, Rebecca sent me articles about successful influencers who had family backing and screenshots of Tyler's videos performing well. She also had Tyler text me directly, asking if I was going to help with his birthday party, which felt manipulative. I stood firm in my decision not to fund the extravagant party, but I did offer to contribute a reasonable amount toward a more modest celebration. Rebecca rejected this compromise and said that anything less than her original vision would be inadequate for Tyler's brand. Eventually, Rebecca borrowed money from our parents and put the rest on credit cards to throw Tyler's dream birthday party. The event was indeed elaborate and generated plenty of social media content, but the financial stress it created for their family was obvious. The party photos looked amazing online, and Tyler's followers seemed impressed, but the reality was that Rebecca had gone into serious debt to create content for a 14-year-old's social media account. The whole situation felt like a cautionary tale about prioritizing image over financial stability. Months later, Rebecca is still struggling to pay off the party expenses and has started asking other family members for loans. Tyler's follower count did increase after the birthday content, but not enough to generate significant income. The return on investment for that $8,000 party was essentially zero. Tyler himself seems embarrassed by his mother's financial sacrifice and has started making more modest content that doesn't require expensive production values. He's actually more relatable now, that he's not constantly showcasing luxury items that his family couldn't afford. The whole experience taught me that some parents will sacrifice their financial security to fuel their children's dreams, even when those dreams are based more on social media metrics than realistic career planning. Rebecca genuinely believed that one viral birthday party could launch Tyler's influencer empire. That was the end of that story. Rebecca wanted $8,000 for her son's birthday party because he has TikTok followers. Like, having an audience of teenagers means you deserve a wedding-level celebration budget. She really thought social media fame entitled her family to crowd-funded luxury events. Some parents will literally go into debt chasing internet validation for their kids. To the next story. My entitled mother-in-law tried to steal my wedding dress because her daughter deserved it more. I'm 26 and I got married last month to the love of my life, David. The whole experience should have been magical, but my mother-in-law Patricia turned it into an absolute nightmare that I'm still processing weeks later. David and I had been together for 3 years before we got engaged, and during that time I thought I had a pretty good relationship with his family. Patricia was always sweet to my face, asking about my job, complimenting my cooking when we'd visit for Sunday dinners. She seemed genuinely excited when David proposed, immediately asking about wedding plans and offering to help however she could. The problem started when David's younger sister, Jessica, got engaged about 6 months after we did. Jessica is 23, works part-time at a boutique, and has always been the golden child who could do no wrong in Patricia's eyes. The moment Jessica announced her engagement, something shifted. Suddenly every conversation with Patricia became a comparison between our two weddings. When I mentioned I'd found my dream dress, Patricia asked to see pictures. I was hesitant at first, but David encouraged me to share since she'd been so supportive. The dress was this gorgeous vintage-inspired gown with delicate lace sleeves and a flowing train that I'd saved up for months to afford. It cost me nearly $2,000, which was a huge stretch on my teacher's salary, but it was perfect. Patricia's reaction was interesting. She stared at the photo for a long time, then said it was beautiful, but maybe a bit too sophisticated for someone my age. I brushed off the comment, thinking she was just being protective or maybe a little jealous that Jessica hadn't found her dress yet. 3 weeks before my wedding, I got a call from the bridal shop. The woman on the phone sounded confused and apologetic. She said someone claiming to be my mother had come in with a copy of my receipt and tried to take my dress, saying there had been a family emergency and they needed to move the pickup date. Fortunately, the shop has strict policies about dress pickup requiring photo identification, so they refused to release it. My blood ran cold. I immediately called Patricia, thinking maybe there was some misunderstanding. When she answered, her voice was strangely defensive before I even said anything. I asked if she'd been to my bridal shop, and there was this long pause before she said she just wanted to surprise me by picking it up early, so I wouldn't have to make the trip. That explanation might have made sense if it wasn't complete nonsense. The shop was literally 5 minutes from my apartment, and I had specifically scheduled my pickup for the weekend before the wedding because I wanted to do a final fitting. I told Patricia this, and she got flustered, saying she was just trying to help and didn't understand why I was being so suspicious. I let it go, but something felt wrong. I called the bridal shop back and asked them to describe the woman who tried to pick up my dress. The description matched Patricia perfectly, down to her distinctive red hair and the pearl earrings she always wore. But here's the kicker. When I asked what reason she'd given for the emergency pickup, the shop employee said she'd mentioned needing the dress for her daughter's wedding that weekend. My wedding was still 3 weeks away. Jessica's wedding wasn't for another 8 months. I confronted David about it that night, and he was just as confused as I was. He called his mum, and I could hear her getting increasingly agitated on the other end of the line. Finally, she admitted she'd gone to the shop, but she claimed it was because Jessica had fallen in love with my dress from the photos and was heartbroken that she couldn't have something similar. According to Patricia, Jessica had been crying for weeks about how unfair it was that I got the perfect dress while she was stuck with whatever leftovers she could find. Patricia said she just wanted to see if maybe we could work out some kind of arrangement where Jessica could wear the dress for her wedding, since hers was so much later, and I could find something else. I was speechless. She was seriously suggesting that I give up the dress I'd saved for and dreamed about so her daughter could wear it instead. When I pointed out that Jessica could literally order the exact same dress from the same designer, Patricia said it wouldn't be the same because mine was the original, and Jessica deserved to have something special for her big day. David was furious. He told his mother that what she'd done was completely inappropriate and that she owed me an apology. Patricia's response was that she didn't understand why I was being so selfish when family should help each other, and that Jessica was going through such a hard time planning her wedding on a tight budget. The irony was incredible. I was a teacher making $35,000 a year, while Jessica lived rent-free with her parents and had her father paying for her entire wedding, but somehow I was the selfish one for wanting to wear the dress I'd bought with my own money to my own wedding. The situation escalated when Jessica called me directly, crying and begging me to let her borrow the dress. She said she'd seen the photos and it was exactly what she'd always dreamed of wearing, and it wasn't fair that I got it first just because I was getting married sooner. She offered to pay me back the full price after her wedding, as if the money was the issue, and not the fact that she wanted to wear my wedding dress to her own wedding. I told Jessica, as gently as I could, that I understood she loved the dress, but it was my wedding dress, and I wasn't comfortable lending it out. I suggested she look into having a similar one made, or finding the same designer. She hung up on me. The next day, Patricia showed up at my apartment unannounced. She had Jessica with her, and both of them looked like they'd been crying. Patricia launched into this speech about how family should support each other and how she was disappointed in my selfishness. She said she'd raised David to be generous and caring, and she couldn't understand how he'd chosen someone who wouldn't help his own sister in her time of need. Jessica chimed in, saying she'd never ask for anything again if I would just let her wear the dress, and that it would mean everything to her because she'd never be able to afford something so beautiful on her own. She said she'd looked everywhere and couldn't find anything that made her feel as special as she knew my dress would. I stood firm. I explained that I understood their disappointment, but the dress was important to me, and I'd worked hard to afford it. I offered to go shopping with Jessica to help her find something similar, or to put her in touch with the designer to see about ordering the same style. Patricia's mask completely dropped. She started yelling about how I was ruining Jessica's wedding and being vindictive because I was jealous of how close their family was. She said I was trying to drive a wedge between David and his family, and that if I really loved him, I'd make this sacrifice to keep the peace. When I still refused, Patricia actually tried to push past me into my apartment, saying she just wanted to see the dress, and maybe we could work something out. I had to physically block the door, while Jessica stood behind her crying about how unfair her life was. David came home, right in the middle of this chaos. When he saw his mother trying to force her way into our apartment, and his sister sobbing on the doorstep, he completely lost it. He told them both to leave immediately, and not to contact us again until they were ready to apologize for their behavior. Patricia's parting shot was that I was destroying their family, and that she'd never forgive me for breaking Jessica's heart over a stupid dress. She said I was selfish and materialistic, and that she hoped I'd be happy ruining her daughter's special day. The wedding went ahead as planned, and I wore my beautiful dress. But the whole experience was tainted by the drama and the fact that David's family wasn't there. Patricia had convinced Jessica and several other family members to boycott the wedding in solidarity, claiming I was being unreasonable and cruel. David was heartbroken about his family's absence, but he stood by me completely. He said he was disgusted by his mother's behaviour and couldn't believe she'd tried to manipulate and guilt-trip me into giving up something that was rightfully mine. We got some beautiful photos and I felt absolutely stunning in my dress. But every time I look at them now, I remember the stress and drama Patricia caused during what should have been the happiest time of my life. She turned my wedding planning into a battlefield and made me feel guilty for wanting to wear my own dress to my own wedding. The aftermath has been ongoing. Patricia still hasn't apologised, and she's been telling extended family members her version of events, painting me as the villain who refused to help Jessica in her time of need. Some relatives have actually reached out to ask why I couldn't just share the dress, as if that's a normal request. Jessica ended up finding a different dress that she claims to love, though Patricia makes passive-aggressive comments about how it's not as special as mine would have been. She's also started making digs about how some people care more about material things than family relationships. David has gone low contact with his mother and sister, which makes me feel guilty, even though I know their behaviour was completely out of line. He says he doesn't regret standing up for me, but I can see how much it hurts him to have this rift in his family. The whole situation has made me realise that Patricia never actually liked me. She just tolerated me. The moment there was something she wanted for Jessica, she was willing to steal from me to get it. She saw my wedding dress not as something I'd saved for and chosen for my special day, but as something that rightfully belonged to her favourite daughter. Looking back, there were probably signs I missed. Little comments about how Jessica deserved the best things in life, or how it was unfair that she had to work so hard for what she wanted. Patricia had always favoured Jessica, but I thought that was just normal parent-child dynamics. Now I know better. Patricia doesn't see me as family. She sees me as an obstacle to giving Jessica everything she wants. And when I refused to step aside and hand over my wedding dress, I became the enemy. I still can't believe someone would actually try to steal a wedding dress from their future daughter-in-law, but here we are. I got to wear my dream dress to my dream wedding, but the cost was David's relationship with his family. Sometimes I wonder if it would have been easier to just give in, but then I remember that if I'd caved on this, there would have been other demands down the line. Patricia showed me exactly who she was when she thought she could manipulate me into giving up something important to me. I'm just glad I found out before the wedding instead of after, when it might have been too late to set boundaries. That's the end of that wild story. I mean, the sheer entitlement of trying to literally steal someone's wedding dress is mind-blowing. And then having the audacity to show up at her apartment demanding she hand it over. Patricia really thought she could guilt and manipulate her way into getting what she wanted for her precious golden child. The fact that she tried to paint the bride as selfish for wanting to wear her own dress to her own wedding is just incredible. At least David had his wife's back, even if it cost him his relationship with his toxic family. Let's move on to our next story, which involves a parent who thought public property belonged to them personally. My neighbour called the police on me for using the public park because her son was playing there first. I live in a pretty quiet suburban neighbourhood where most people mind their own business and get along fine. There's a small public park at the end of our street with a playground, some benches, and a little grassy area where kids like to run around. It's nothing fancy, just your typical neighbourhood park that the city maintains. I'm a single dad to my 8-year-old daughter Lily, and we go to this park probably 3 or 4 times a week after I get home from work. It's our routine. She loves the swings and I can sit on a bench and decompress from the day while keeping an eye on her. We've been doing this for about 2 years since we moved to the neighbourhood, and it's never been an issue. The problem started about 3 months ago when new neighbours moved into the house directly across from the park. The family has a son who looks to be around Lily's age, maybe a little older, and from day one his mother seemed to think she owned the entire park. The first incident happened on a Tuesday evening. Lily and I arrived at the park around 5:30, which is our usual time. There was one other kid there, the new neighbour's son, playing on the monkey bars while his mother sat on a bench scrolling through her phone. No big deal. The park is public, and there's plenty of room for everyone. Lily went straight for the swings like she always does, and I settled onto my usual bench with a book. We'd been there maybe 10 minutes when the woman approached me. She was probably in her early 30s, well dressed in that aggressive suburban mum way, and she had this fake smile that immediately put me on edge. She introduced herself as Monica and said her son Trevor was really enjoying having the park to himself for his after-school playtime. Then she asked if maybe we could come back later, since Trevor got overwhelmed when there were too many kids around, and this was his special time to decompress. I was honestly taken aback. I politely explained that this was a public park, and we came here every day at this time as part of our routine. I said there was plenty of space for both kids to play without bothering each other, and that Lily was really looking forward to her swing time. Monica's smile got tighter, and she said she understood my position, but hoped I could be flexible since Trevor had special needs and required a predictable environment. She suggested maybe we could work out a schedule so both kids could enjoy the park without conflicts. Now, I'm not unsympathetic to kids with special needs, but this was a public park, not her backyard. I told Monica that while I respected her concerns about her son, I wasn't willing to avoid a public space during our established routine. I suggested that if Trevor needed a more controlled environment, maybe they could visit during less popular times or look into private play areas. Monica's fake friendliness evaporated instantly. She said I was being incredibly selfish and inconsiderate, and that clearly I didn't understand what it was like to have a child with challenges. She said she'd hoped we could work something out, like reasonable adults, but apparently I wasn't interested in being part of a community. I tried to stay calm and reiterated that the park was public property and we had every right to be there. Monica huffed and walked back to her bench, but she kept shooting me dirty looks and whispering to her son while pointing in our direction. Lily noticed the tension and asked why the lady seemed upset. I just told her some people have strong opinions about sharing, and we continued with our normal park visit. But I could feel Monica watching us the entire time, and it made the whole experience uncomfortable. The next day, Monica was there again when we arrived. This time she didn't approach me directly, but she made a big show of telling Trevor loudly that some people don't care about children with autism and that he'd have to try extra hard to ignore the distractions. She kept using phrases like inconsiderate neighbours and selfish parents while staring directly at me. I decided to ignore her passive-aggressive commentary and focus on Lily, who was happily playing and oblivious to the adult drama. But Monica ramped up her behaviour over the next few weeks. She started arriving at the park earlier and earlier, clearly trying to establish some kind of territorial claim. She'd spread out blankets and toys across multiple benches and play areas, then act annoyed when other kids wanted to use equipment that was technically in Trevor's space. So here she brought a portable speaker and played children's music loudly, saying it helped Trevor focus, but obviously trying to make the park less appealing for other families. The situation escalated when Monica started recruiting other parents to her cause. She'd approach anyone who came to the park with kids and launch into a sob story about how Trevor needed special accommodations and how one particular family was making things difficult for everyone. Most parents saw through her manipulation and either ignored her or politely declined to get involved. But she did manage to win over a few people who didn't know the full situation. Suddenly I was getting dirty looks from parents I'd never even spoken to, and I heard whispers about the mean dad who wouldn't let the autistic kid play in peace. The breaking point came on a Friday evening 3 weeks ago. Lily and I arrived at the park to find Monica had set up an elaborate birthday party setup with balloons, streamers, and a folding table covered with presents. She'd essentially claimed the entire central area of the park for her son's celebration. I wouldn't have minded if she'd mentioned it beforehand or put up a sign, but she'd never said anything about a party. Lily was disappointed because the decorations blocked access to her favourite climbing structure, but I figured we'd just use the swings and let them have their celebration. That's when Monica marched over and informed me that the park was reserved for Trevor's birthday party and we needed to leave. I explained that public parks don't take reservations and we were happy to share the space, but we weren't leaving. Monica completely lost it. She started screaming about how I was ruining her son's special day, and how could I be so cruel to a child with disabilities. She said I was harassing her family and making Trevor feel unwelcome in his own neighbourhood. Other party guests were staring, and I felt terrible that this confrontation was happening in front of all these kids. I tried to de-escalate by offering to stick to one corner of the park so we wouldn't interfere with their party, but Monica was beyond reason. She pulled out her phone and started recording me, saying she was documenting my harassment for the police. She was yelling about how I was trespassing on reserved space and refusing to leave when asked by the party organiser. At that point, I decided it wasn't worth the drama, especially with Lily getting upset by all the shouting. We left the park and went for ice cream instead, but I was furious about being bullied out of a public space by someone who thought she could claim it as her own. I thought that would be the end of it, but Monica apparently wasn't satisfied with just driving us away from the party. The next Monday, when we arrived for our usual park visit, she was waiting for us with her phone already recording. She announced loudly that she was documenting continued harassment and that she'd already filed complaints with the neighbourhood association and the city parks department. She said I was targeting her family because of her son's disability and creating a hostile environment. I told her calmly that we were just here to use the park like any other family and that I had no interest in bothering her or her son. But Monica kept following us around with her phone, narrating about how I was violating their space and making threatening gestures. Lily was getting scared and confused by this woman's behaviour, so I decided we needed to leave again. But as we were walking away, Monica called the police. 20 minutes later, while Lily and I were at home having dinner, there was a knock on our door. 2 officers were standing on my porch looking slightly embarrassed but professional. They explained that they'd received a complaint about harassment at the neighbourhood park and needed to get my side of the story. I invited them in and explained the entire situation from the beginning, including Monica's attempts to claim the public park as private space for her son and her escalating harassment of other families who dared to use it during her preferred times. The officers listened patiently and took notes, but I could tell they thought the complaint was frivolous. One of them mentioned that they'd already spoken with Monica and that her story had some inconsistencies that raised red flags. Apparently, Monica had claimed I'd been verbally abusive and physically threatening, which was completely false. She'd also insisted that she had some kind of official accommodation from the city, allowing her son exclusive use of the park during certain hours, which the officers had immediately known was nonsense. They asked if I had any witnesses to the various incidents, and I mentioned several other parents who'd seen Monica's behaviour over the past few months. They said they'd follow up if necessary, but that I shouldn't worry about any formal charges, since there was clearly no basis for them. The officers were actually very understanding about the situation. One of them mentioned that they dealt with similar cases where entitled parents tried to use their children's needs as justification for claiming public spaces. They said Monica's behaviour was more concerning than anything I'd done. Before they left, they advised me to document any future incidents with Monica and to call them immediately if she continued harassing my family. They also suggested I might want to speak with other neighbours about her behaviour, since this probably wasn't an isolated issue. Sure enough, when I started asking around, I discovered that Monica had already had conflicts with several other families in the neighbourhood. She'd tried to ban dogs from the park because Trevor was afraid of them, demanded that the city remove the basketball hoop because the noise bothered him, and even asked neighbours to avoid wearing bright colours when visiting the park because they were overstimulating. The most ridiculous incident involved her calling code enforcement on an elderly man who fed pigeons near the park, claiming the birds were creating an unsanitary environment that endangered her son's health. Code enforcement told her that feeding pigeons wasn't illegal and that she needed to stop wasting their time with frivolous complaints. Monica had basically appointed herself the unofficial park dictator, using her son's autism as justification for increasingly unreasonable demands. And when people didn't comply with her made-up rules, she escalated to harassment and false police reports. The irony is that Trevor seemed like a perfectly normal kid who was capable of sharing space with others. The few times I'd observed him playing before his mother intervened, he was interacting fine with other children and didn't seem bothered by their presence. Monica was the problem, not her son. She'd created this narrative where Trevor needed complete control over his environment, but it seemed more like she was using his diagnosis to justify her own controlling behaviour. After the police visit, I decided to be more proactive about the situation. I reached out to the other parents Monica had targeted, and we started documenting her harassment. We also contacted the City Parks Department to make them aware of her false claims about having official accommodations. The Parks Department was very helpful and confirmed that no such accommodations existed. They also said they'd received several complaints about Monica's behaviour and were considering issuing her a warning about misusing public facilities. Last week, Monica tried her recording routine again when we visited the park, but this time I was ready for her. I started recording too, and I calmly stated that we were using a public park during open hours and had every right to be there. Monica realised that her intimidation tactics weren't working anymore and that she was now being documented as well. She tried to continue her harassment routine, but it fell flat when she knew it was all being captured on video. She finally gave up and left the park with Trevor, muttering about how the neighbourhood had gone downhill since certain people moved in. I think she realised that her reign of terror over the local park was coming to an end. Since then, we've been able to enjoy our normal park visits without incident. Monica still lives across the street, but she seems to have moved on to other battles, or maybe finally realised that she can't claim ownership of public property. The whole experience taught me that sometimes you have to stand up to bullies, even when they try to hide behind sympathetic circumstances. Monica was using her son's autism as a weapon to get her way, which is actually pretty harmful to families who genuinely need accommodations and support. I feel bad that Trevor got caught up in his mother's drama, but hopefully he'll learn better ways to interact with the community as he gets older. As for Monica, I think she learned that calling the police on people for using public parks isn't going to get her the private playground she wanted. And that's where that story ends. The entitlement here is just staggering. Imagine thinking you can call dibs on a public park and then actually calling the police when other families dare to use it. Monica really thought she could weaponize her son's autism to control an entire neighbourhood and claim public property as her personal domain. The fact that she escalated to false police reports when her intimidation tactics didn't work shows just how far some people will go when they don't get their way. Thank goodness the officers saw right through her manipulation. Our next story takes us into the world of retail, where entitled parents seem to think store policies don't apply to them. My entitled mother demanded I give her my employee discount at a store where I don't even work. I work at a local electronics store part-time while going to college, and I've been dealing with difficult customers for about 2 years now. But nothing prepared me for the absolute chaos that unfolded when my own mother decided she deserved special treatment at a completely different store. Last weekend, my mum asked me to go shopping with her at the mall because she needed help picking out a new laptop for work. I figured it would be a nice way to spend time together, and since I know about computers from my job, I could actually be helpful. We went to the big box electronics store on the other side of town, nowhere near where I work. My mum found a laptop she liked, But when we got to the register, she immediately started acting weird. She kept looking at me expectantly while the cashier rang up her purchase, and when the total came to $800, she turned to me and said loudly, "Okay, honey, give them your employee discount." I was confused and embarrassed. I whispered to her that I didn't work at this store, so I couldn't give her any kind of discount. She just laughed and said, "Don't be modest, just tell them you work in electronics." The teenage cashier looked between us awkwardly, while other customers started lining up behind us. I tried to explain quietly that I worked at a completely different store across town, but my mum wasn't having it. She turned to the cashier and announced, "My son works in electronics, so we should get the employee discount. He knows all about these computers." The poor kid behind the register looked like he wanted to disappear. I felt my face burning with embarrassment as I tried to clarify the situation. I told the cashier that I worked at Tech World on 5th Street, not at this store, so there was definitely no discount available. I thought that would be the end of it, but my mum doubled down. She started arguing with both me and the cashier, insisting that employee discounts should work at any electronics store because they're all part of the same industry. She said it was ridiculous that companies wouldn't honour each other's employee benefits, and that the cashier was probably just new and didn't understand the policy. The cashier, bless his heart, tried to explain that employee discounts are specific to each company and that he couldn't apply a discount from a completely different store. My mum responded by demanding to speak to a manager because clearly this was just a training issue. I was mortified. Other customers were staring, and I could see people behind us getting impatient with the hold-up. I kept trying to tell my mum that she was making a scene over nothing, but she was convinced that I was just being stubborn and not advocating for our family properly. When the manager came over, my mum launched into this whole speech about how her son was a valued employee in the electronics industry and deserved professional courtesy. She said she couldn't believe how poorly they were treating a fellow retail worker, and that this was exactly the kind of thing that was wrong with customer service these days. The manager listened patiently and then explained very politely that employee discounts are internal company benefits and can't be applied to purchases at competitor stores. He said he understood her frustration, but there was simply no mechanism for honouring another store's employee pricing. My mum's response was to accuse them of discrimination. She said they were clearly targeting us because we looked like we couldn't afford full price, and that if I was a manager instead of just a sales associate, they'd be more respectful. She demanded corporate contact information so she could file a complaint about their unfair treatment. At this point, I was ready to sink through the floor. I pulled my mum aside and begged her to just pay for the laptop and leave, but she was on a mission now. She said she wasn't going to let them take advantage of us, and that I needed to learn to stand up for myself in retail situations. She marched back to the counter and demanded proof that employee discounts couldn't be shared between stores. She wanted to see the policy in writing, and she suggested that maybe if I called my manager at Tech World, we could work out some kind of professional arrangement. The manager remained incredibly professional throughout this entire ordeal, but I could see other employees gathering to watch the spectacle. Some customers had given up and left their items to find another register, while others were openly recording the situation on their phones. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I loudly announced to everyone within earshot that I did not work at this store, had never worked at this store, and that my employee discount from a completely different company had absolutely nothing to do with this purchase. I said my mum was mistaken about how retail discounts work, and that I was embarrassed by the entire situation. My mum looked shocked that I'd contradicted her publicly. She tried to save face by saying she was just testing whether they'd be honest with us, but nobody was buying it. She reluctantly paid full price for the laptop, while muttering about how customer service wasn't what it used to be. The walk back to the car was incredibly awkward. My mum tried to act like nothing had happened, chatting about her new laptop and asking if I wanted to grab lunch, but I was still processing the fact that she'd just tried to scam a store using my employment at a completely different company. When I finally asked her what she'd been thinking, she got defensive. She said employee discounts were a perk that should be honoured everywhere because retail workers don't make enough money and deserve breaks wherever they can get them. She claimed she was just trying to save money and didn't understand why I wasn't more supportive. I tried to explain that what she'd attempted was essentially fraud and that she could have gotten both of us in serious trouble. But she brushed off my concerns, saying that big corporations make plenty of money and wouldn't miss a few dollars in discount savings. The most frustrating part was that she genuinely seemed to believe she'd done nothing wrong. In her mind, having a son who worked in electronics somehow entitled her to discounts at any electronics store, regardless of company policies or basic logic. She kept bringing up examples of other perks that supposedly work across companies, like how LEA discounts are honoured at different hotels. I had to explain multiple times that employee discounts are completely different from membership benefits and loyalty programs. Even now, weeks later, she occasionally brings up that shopping trip and complains about how unreasonable that store was. She's convinced they lost a customer for life over their inflexible discount policy, and she's told several family members about our terrible experience there. The worst part is that she started asking me about employee discounts at other stores where I don't work. She seems to think that working in retail gives me some kind of universal insider access to deals everywhere. I've had to repeatedly explain that my part-time job at one store doesn't make me a retail industry insider. Last week she asked if my employee discount would work at the grocery store where my cousin works, because surely family connections should count for something. I realised that she still fundamentally doesn't understand how any of this works. I love my mum, but this whole experience showed me a side of her that I'd never seen before. She was willing to lie, argue with teenagers, demand to speak to managers, and cause a public scene all over a discount that never existed in the first place. The strangest part is that she can definitely afford to pay full price for things. This wasn't about the money. It was about feeling like she deserved special treatment because her son works in retail. She seemed to think that my job somehow elevated her status as a customer everywhere we went. I've started declining her invitations to go shopping together, which makes me sad because we used to enjoy those trips. But I can't handle the second-hand embarrassment of watching her try to negotiate discounts based on my employment at completely unrelated stores. The whole thing has made me more empathetic toward the customers I deal with at my actual job. I've always tried to be patient with difficult people, but now I understand how mortifying it can be when your family member is the one causing problems for minimum wage employees who are just trying to do their jobs. I still cringe when I think about that poor cashier who got caught in the middle of my mum's discount delusion. He handled the situation with way more grace than I would have if someone had tried to scam my store using fake employee credentials from a competitor. That's the end of that story. Wow, the second-hand embarrassment is real with this one. The fact that she genuinely believed her son working at one electronics store somehow entitled her to discounts everywhere is just wild. And then doubling down when called out, demanding managers, claiming discrimination, the whole 9 yards. That poor cashier probably still tells this story to co-workers. At least the poster had the sense to be mortified instead of enabling the madness. Let's move on to another gem about a parent who thought rules were more like suggestions. My entitled father-in-law ruined my daughter's birthday party because he thought the theme was stupid. I have a 7-year-old daughter named Ruby who is absolutely obsessed with dinosaurs. Not princesses, not unicorns, but specifically paleontology and prehistoric creatures. She knows more about different dinosaur species than most adults, and she's been asking for a dinosaur-themed birthday party since January. My husband and I were thrilled to plan something special for her. We booked a community centre, ordered dinosaur decorations, and even hired a guy who does educational presentations with realistic dinosaur puppets. Ruby was over the moon with excitement, and she'd been telling everyone at school about her upcoming dinosaur adventure party. The problem started when my father-in-law, Frank, found out about the theme. Frank is one of those traditional guys who has very specific ideas about what little girls should like. When Ruby mentioned her dinosaur party during a family dinner, he laughed and said something about how she'd grow out of this phase soon enough. I should have seen the red flags then, but I assumed he was just making conversation. Frank has always been a bit old-fashioned, but he loves Ruby and generally keeps his opinions to himself when it comes to parenting decisions. 2 weeks before the party, Frank called my husband and suggested we might want to reconsider the theme. He said he'd been thinking about it, and maybe a dinosaur party wasn't appropriate for a little girl's birthday. He offered to pay for a princess party instead, complete with a dress-up station and a character appearance. My husband politely declined and explained that Ruby had specifically requested dinosaurs and was really excited about learning more about paleontology. Frank seemed to accept this, but he made some comment about how we were confusing her about gender roles and that she'd thank us later for steering her toward more feminine interests. I was annoyed but figured he'd get over it once he saw how happy Ruby was at her party. She'd been working on dinosaur facts to share with her friends, and she'd even convinced 3 of her classmates to dress up as different prehistoric creatures. This was her dream party, and I wasn't about to let anyone's outdated opinions ruin it. The day of the party arrived, and everything was going perfectly. The community centre looked amazing with all our decorations. The dinosaur expert was setting up his presentation, and Ruby was glowing with excitement in her paleontologist costume, complete with a safari hat and toy excavation tools. Guests started arriving around 2 o'clock, and all the kids were immediately fascinated by the dinosaur displays we'd set up around the room. Ruby was in her element, explaining the difference between herbivores and carnivores to her friends and showing off her collection of fossil replicas. Frank arrived about 30 minutes into the party, and I could tell immediately that something was wrong. He looked around the room with this expression of barely concealed disgust, like we'd decorated with garbage instead of carefully chosen dinosaur-themed items. But Frank wasn't just disapproving. He'd come prepared. He walked in carrying several large bags from a party store, and when I asked what they were for, he announced that he'd brought some appropriate decorations to make the party more suitable for a young lady. Before I could stop him, Frank started pulling princess decorations out of his bags. Pink streamers, tiara-shaped balloons, and a huge banner that said, "Happy Birthday, Princess," in glittery letters. He began hanging these items over our dinosaur decorations while explaining to anyone who would listen that little girls should have princess parties, not boring educational themes. I was speechless. Ruby looked confused and upset as her grandfather started covering up all the decorations we'd spent weeks planning. Some of the other parents were staring, and I could see kids pointing at the mismatched decorations and whispering to each other. My husband immediately intervened and asked his father what he thought he was doing. Frank replied that he was saving the party and making it more appropriate for Ruby's age and gender. He said she'd appreciate having a real little girl's party instead of this confusing dinosaur nonsense. Ruby, bless her heart, marched right up to her grandfather and told him she didn't want princess decorations because this was a dinosaur party. She explained very seriously that she'd invited her friends to learn about paleontology, not to play dress-up, and that she needed him to put her dinosaur banners back up. Frank's response was to pat Ruby on the head and tell her that she was just confused because we'd been filling her head with inappropriate interests. He said that once she saw how much fun a princess party could be, she'd realise that dinosaurs were for boys and she should focus on more feminine hobbies. I finally found my voice and told Frank that he needed to stop redecorating our party immediately. This was Ruby's birthday. She'd specifically requested a dinosaur theme, and we weren't changing it to suit his personal preferences about what little girls should like. Frank got defensive and said he was just trying to help Ruby develop proper interests. He claimed that encouraging her dinosaur obsession was setting her up for social problems later, and that other parents were probably judging us for not steering her toward more traditional activities. The dinosaur presenter, who had been watching this whole exchange with obvious confusion, finally stepped in. He mentioned that about half of his audience at educational events were girls, and that many of the world's leading paleontologists were women. He said Ruby was one of the most knowledgeable kids he'd ever met, and that her passion for science should be celebrated. Frank dismissed the presenter's comments and continued hanging his princess decorations. He said he didn't care what some stranger thought about child development, and that he knew what was best for his granddaughter. He started removing our dinosaur centerpieces and replacing them with plastic tiaras and fairy wands he'd brought. At this point, Ruby started crying. She'd been looking forward to this party for months, and her grandfather was systematically destroying everything she'd been excited about. She kept asking why he was taking away her dinosaurs and replacing them with things she didn't want. Several of the party guests were getting uncomfortable with the tension, and some parents were starting to gather their kids to leave early. The whole celebration was falling apart because Frank couldn't accept that his granddaughter had interests that didn't fit his narrow definition of femininity. My husband finally snapped. He told his father that he had exactly 2 minutes to remove all of his decorations and leave the party, or he'd be escorted out by security. Frank acted shocked that his son would speak to him that way, especially in front of all these people. Frank tried to rally support from the other parents, explaining that he was just trying to make the party more appropriate, and that surely they understood his concerns about gender-appropriate activities. Most of the adults just stared at him in disbelief, and one mum actually told him that his behaviour was completely inappropriate. When Frank realised that nobody was going to back him up, he got angry. He started ranting about how we were ruining Ruby's childhood by encouraging her unnatural interests, and that she'd grow up confused about her identity because we wouldn't guide her toward proper feminine activities. He said he was trying to save her from becoming one of those weird girls who couldn't relate to other children, and that we'd thank him someday when she developed normal interests instead of this dinosaur obsession that was obviously just a phase we were indulging too much. The final straw came when Frank grabbed Ruby's fossil collection from the display table and announced that he was taking it home until she was old enough to appreciate more appropriate toys. Ruby absolutely lost it, sobbing that those were her special rocks and that she needed them for her presentation. That's when my husband physically removed his father from the party. He took the fossils back, handed them to Ruby, and told Frank that he was no longer welcome at family events until he could learn to respect his granddaughter's interests and our parenting decisions. Frank left shouting about how we were destroying Ruby's femininity and that he'd tried to save the party, but we were too stubborn to accept help. He said we'd regret not listening to him when Ruby grew up socially maladjusted because we'd encouraged her weird hobbies instead of teaching her to be a proper young lady. After Frank left, we had to spend 20 minutes removing all of his princess decorations and trying to restore the dinosaur theme. The presenter was incredibly understanding and even extended his program to make up for the time lost dealing with the disruption. Ruby eventually stopped crying and got back into party mode, but I could tell the whole incident had shaken her. She kept asking why Grandpa didn't like her dinosaurs and whether there was something wrong with girls learning about paleontology. We reassured her that there was absolutely nothing wrong with her interests and that Grandpa was just confused about what makes a good party. The dinosaur expert backed us up, sharing stories about famous female paleontologists and telling Ruby that her knowledge was impressive for someone her age. The party ended up being a success despite Frank's interference. Ruby had a great time with her friends, learned some new dinosaur facts, and got to show off her fossil collection. But the whole experience was tainted by her grandfather's attempt to impose his outdated gender expectations on her special day. The aftermath has been ongoing. Frank has been calling my husband constantly, insisting that he was just trying to help, and that we overreacted to his suggestions. He claims he never meant to upset Ruby, and that he was only thinking about her future social development. He's also been telling other family members his version of events, painting himself as the concerned grandfather who tried to save his granddaughter from parents who are encouraging inappropriate interests. Some relatives have actually reached out to ask whether we think Ruby's dinosaur obsession might be unhealthy. My husband has gone low contact with his father until Frank agrees to apologize to Ruby and acknowledge that her interests are valid regardless of traditional gender expectations. Frank has refused, saying he shouldn't have to apologize for trying to guide his granddaughter toward normal activities. The whole situation has made me realize that Frank's old-fashioned attitudes run much deeper than I'd thought. This wasn't just about party decorations. It was about his fundamental belief that girls should conform to traditional feminine roles regardless of their actual interests or personalities. Ruby, for her part, has bounced back remarkably well. She's still obsessed with dinosaurs, and she's even more determined to become a paleontologist when she grows up. She started telling people that girls can like whatever they want, and that anyone who disagrees is just confused about science. I'm proud of how she handled the situation, and I'm glad we stood firm against Frank's attempts to shame her interests. But I'm also sad that her 7th birthday will always be remembered as the day her grandfather tried to force her to be someone she's not. The experience has strengthened my resolve to support Ruby's passions, whatever they may be. If she wants to study dinosaurs, we'll encourage her scientific curiosity. If she decides tomorrow that she loves princesses, we'll support that too. But we'll never let anyone make her feel ashamed for being interested in things that don't fit traditional gender stereotypes. Frank may never understand that his granddaughter's happiness matters more than his outdated opinions about what little girls should like. But Ruby will grow up knowing that her family supports her dreams, and that's what really matters. That's where this story comes to an end. This one hits differently because it's a family member actively sabotaging a child's joy. Frank literally showed up with bags of princess decorations to override a 7-year-old's carefully planned dinosaur party. The image of him ripping down dinosaur banners while Ruby cries is just heartbreaking. And then trying to steal her fossil collection? Thank goodness her parents stood their ground and kicked him out before he could do more damage. If you enjoyed this batch of stories and want to see more, feel free to hit that subscribe button for more, as I read stories just like this every day. Other than that, take care and see you tomorrow.